Welcome back. So Twitter has recently launched a new subscription service where users pay $8 to get a verification badge. Now, according to cybersecurity companies, criminals are now exploiting this in an attempt to steal people's personal information. So how exactly do they do this, and what do social media users need to look out for? Well, let's get you some insights from Brian Pinnock. He's a cybersecurity expert with Mimecast. Live to us via our video link this morning. Brian, great to see you. Thanks for making time to chat to us. So, as a start, in layman's terms, help us understand how this subscription fee makes it easier for people who are carrying out things like phishing attacks.
So basically what this is it's threat actors or malicious criminals basically relying and exploiting on the human factor. They tailor scams to current events, whatever they might be. We saw it during the pandemic. We're seeing it now with Twitter. So any kind of controversy leads to some kind of wave of phishing. And what they're doing is we actually saw this being exploited in a number of different ways. We saw a large pharmaceutical company being impersonated. I won't mention the name, but what happened is their share price actually took quite a serious knock when somebody impersonated them, paid their $8 and came online. This is something slightly different. What it is an attack that's targeting people who are already either a politician or a celebrity or a journalist of some sort, and those are obviously quite important people.
Right. And what we're finding is quite different this time. I mean, typically when phishing messages are sent out, there are things to look out for, like, spelling errors or just, sentences that aren't really constructed that well. In this particular case, we're finding that the people carrying out these attacks have, dare I say, learned from the past and are sending out messages that actually look pretty legit, making it more difficult to kind of suss them out.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, phishing has just become a kind of inescapable part of life. I think just about everybody has experienced phishing attacks of various kinds. And as you mentioned, they're normally quite easy to spot, the basic ones. Unfortunately, what we're starting to see is a trend where these attacks are becoming more sophisticated and much better orchestrated. And this was a very good example of that. What they actually did is they had very authentic looking emails. They were very cleanly formatted, well written. So one of the normal things that you would use to kind of spot a scam, that wasn't there. They were sent by a very trusted transactional messaging service. So most of the cybersecurity tools wouldn't have picked that up. And then they also did something quite clever. They hijacked a website of an online retailer and repurposed it to look like a Twitter login page. So again, what they were doing is doing things that in such a way that most of the tools that companies and individuals would use to try and pick these things up would have been ineffective.
Yeah. We also understand that they're sending some of these messages through mail or mailer send. You'll tell us a bit more about what that is and how it complicates our ability to essentially catch these emails before they land up in our inboxes, if this is in fact sent via email.
Yeah, so essentially the way email works on the internet, these sort of broad-based emails, you have trusted senders, and typically it's organizations, the ones that you know well, and relatively untrusted senders. So an organization like MailerSend, and then many of these transactional messaging services, works very hard to try and maintain a good reputation so that they don't actually get blocklisted by any of the large cybersecurity firms, and then obviously those emails wouldn't get through. And what these particular cyber attackers seem to have done is actually managed to actually hack into an account on this particular transactional messaging service and then use that. So that's why I say there's multiple layers of sophistication here. These particular attackers were very clever about how they were doing it, and they were using this controversy at Twitter because obviously it's in the media and targeting very, very key people. And I think that was the thing that makes this fairly unique.
Yeah, in fact, as you're speaking, we're just showing images of what some of these phishing attacks look like. And yeah, it's incredibly difficult to be able to distinguish what a real or legitimate, genuine email is and what isn't, because of, as we've mentioned, how good these attackers have become. It does raise questions, though, Brian, around the future of Twitter, because in a stroke of irony, right, the verification badge was meant to help us distinguish the real guys from the bad guys. And now, ironically, the bad guys have clear access to it too. And it, I guess, means that we might need another verification to verify which verification badge is the real one.
Yes, unfortunately, that whole kind of debacle created a huge problem. One of the critical things that we need to get right, particularly in this digital world we're moving into, is this concept of identity and verifying identity. And Twitter had a fairly good system of verifying identity. It wasn't perfect. And unfortunately, what's happened is that has been undermined quite significantly. And I mean, I think the lesson there for all of us is not to trust anything. You know, often what we do is we trust the information that comes from politicians, celebrities, journalists, organizations. And now you have to sort of be a lot less trusting, particularly in situations like this where, you know, you were kind of almost not even thinking about it, but just relying on the fact, oh, it was a blue check mark, so I know that that person is somebody that I think they are. Now it could actually be somebody who's impersonating them, and I think that's the world that we're moving into.
Sure. And how does one, I guess, live sustainably in that kind of world? I mean, I hear you about not trusting anyone, but there's also dangers in that, isn't it? I mean, any of the extremes I don't think would be helpful.
So I think the challenge there, it's the same kind of advice we give to both businesses and consumers. And really it's a two-pronged approach. One is to get as much protection as you possibly can afford. And the other one is to build up awareness and continue to have those awareness programs. On the protection side, from a phishing point of view, most successful attacks all share common traits. They get you to click on links, they get you to download malware, or they get you to divulge sensitive information. And there are tools that are out there, like Mimecast, for example, and many others that can actually help you doing that. And those tools can actually sort of help you dial back some of the risk, particularly if they're using things like artificial intelligence. So we can actually use some of those kinds of technologies for good. On the awareness side, the key thing to do is to continually keep your end users and yourself up to date so that you're just sort of thinking about this, and this remains as top of mind as possible. But the reality is it's just something that we're going to have to live with. And continue to be alert and aware.
Yeah. You know, part of how we actually got here was because Twitter was trying to make money out of its platform. And, you know, I guess something ought to be said about that. When you try and monetize that kind of space, you attract all kinds of other things inadvertently as well. Do you foresee any other challenges that comes with that? I mean, part of the success, many people might argue, was that Twitter didn't have to worry about that issue, at least before Elon Musk took over.
I think there's a lesson here for all organizations that you have to almost think like the bad guys and don't just make assumptions based on the way normal people would behave. You've also got to think about how would someone who wanted to do us harm manipulate the situation, whatever it might be. It might be a marketing campaign. It might be a new product launch. It could be anything. How could someone use this against us? And that's the kind of mindsets. It's called red team thinking. The Mimecast threat intelligence team and threat hunting team constantly kind of preaches this whole way of thinking like a hacker, I guess, is the sort of simplest, sort of layman's terms way of thinking about it. But just think in terms of how someone would use these things against you, as opposed to sort of just going forward without necessarily thinking of all the possible implications and sort of second-order effects.
Yeah, without a doubt. Sobering advice. Brian, thanks for your time. Really do appreciate your speaking to us on the AM Report this morning. Brian Pinnock is a cybersecurity expert with Mimecast. Once again, thanks very much indeed.